before I,
Sorry.
that's okay. Just before I get into the actual presentation, I just want to make a disclaimer because I do work for the MNRF, but this presentation, it's not representative of what the MNRF use. All I'm doing as a science specialist is what this presentation is doing is cataloging all the kind of a catalog of potential alternatives to herbicide use. And it's what happens with that is, well, it's up to the HAP committee once you get the catalog. I'm just going to quickly go through, why do we need vegetation management as a tool? So why are we doing vegetation management in the first place? And then kind of what would be a goal of a herbicides alternatives program? And then it's actually the big thing is what are all the alternative herbicide techniques that you could use, and one of the it's not just having the techniques. I've seen a lot of these techniques, but it's got to be matched to the site, or it's not going to work. And finally, just want to end up is that we need any new ideas or input into what we can do is something we really need. So why do foresters need vegetation management? Well, first of all, we're starting off with the premise that we're not going back to the old days of cut and run where we just basically cut it and just leave it and don't worry about what comes back. That we are trying to at least have some control over what's regenerated. And the big challenge in regeneration is with conifers, with the spruce and pines. So that is why the focus on vegetation management tends to be on growing conifers. So, and this is for those in the field, right? This is it looks like a jack pine combined with spruce that was planted, and aspen. It's made for clear cutting. It's a fire species, comes in when there's a disturbance, comes in, and this starts to essentially what I think foresters are afraid of. It starts to basically choke out the pine and spruce. But it's not only the aspen and birch, the trees. Northeast Ontario especially has this shrub layer. It's all the hazels, the maples, pin cherries, alders. They all come in and they're all shade tolerant. I mean, they can. It's a species that can grow in the open. It grows aggressively when there's a lot of light, but it also can survive when there isn't a lot of light. So it can survive under an aspen canopy. So this is what kind of the foresters are up against when they're trying to grow, as it's seen on the left, when they plant spruce and they're trying to grow the conifers, spruce or jack pine. Traditionally, right, this is where the herbicides came in, chemical herbicides, and that's the way it's it is primarily done today. But what we're looking at then is replacing it. It's what I call the non-herbicide vegetation management toolbox. Is what can we add to the toolbox? Foresters, I know, have told me when HAP started over 10 years ago, the field foresters are saying, well, that's fine for you to say, to promote this, but give me an alternative. Fill my toolbox with some alternatives that I can use. So that's what I've kind of cataloged all these alternatives. Most of them, I've pared it down though. Whatever alternatives we use, they have to be reliable, so they have to work. So I'm not going into something like there is a fungus out there which they have tried on. I don't know, they've done this in Quebec on aspen, birch, and some of the shrubs. And the idea, it's a natural fungus, and the idea was that it would just basically once you do a manual brushing, you put this paste on the stump, and it basically kills the tree so it doesn't resprout back up. Well, Quebec tried it, and they found it had trouble. It really didn't work, so they've dropped it. So I'm not going to go over any techniques that people have tried foresters have tried and really hasn't worked. I've also used a filter of feasible. There are techniques out there. One of them in they use in Europe is steam. So they're trying to emulate a fire to kill all the to kill the competition. And in Europe, they actually use steam. We don't. I'm not going to go over that one just because I mean anyone who's walked through a clear cut here, you've got this huge water tank on the back of a skidder, and in Europe they log really clean, so they get going through a field almost, so they can do steam. We anyone's walked through a clear cut here, you couldn't have this big water tank, back of a skidder wandering through our bush. It doesn't work. So I'm not going to cover anything like the steaming and the practical portion. That's I'm not an operations forester. I don't do this, so I'm not really going to get into it. But that's the field foresters, the company foresters will, they kind of give me hints of practically what could work and what couldn't. So this non-herbicide kind of vegetation management is not new to Ontario. Way back in 1992, and that was when Bob Ray and the NDP were in government, they actually started this, what we call the VMAP program, Vegetation Management Alternatives Program. And they really put some money into research to figure out if we can find alternatives and reduce dependence on herbicides. The program lasted as long as Bob Ray was in, but then soon after that, I think it was the Mike Harris government, and this program was dropped. We still have the research from them from back in those days, but nothing new was added. So it's not a new program. Quebec's also, since 2000, Quebec's had non-herbicides treatment. So we've been looking at a lot of what they do in Quebec to kind of get an idea of what could be some possible techniques we could use here, how we could fill our management toolbox. We basically kind of broke it down this way. There's conventional, what we kind of consider conventional. This is what a lot of Quebec does. Prescribed burning, what we call hot planting. I'll go over this in detail. Spot scarification, large cedar, or large seedlings, and motor manual. This is the brushing. What's a little bit new, it's something I've just kind of been pulling out and looking at, is mulching. Even Quebec doesn't do any mulching, but we kind of looked at it in Ontario. And this whole idea of studying and emulate natural systems, Quebec was a leader at one point, but they don't seem to be doing too much of partial harvesting, timing of harvesting, and then this nurse crop idea. A lot of these ideas, especially the conventional, or mainly the conventional, are from this publication in the Forestry Chronicle. So if you want to see this publication, let me know. I've got it electronically. I can send it out. So if we start looking at some of the more conventional ways. Prescribed burning, M&R used to do a lot of this, back in the 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. It used to be quite common. Prescribed burning, this is the big advantage, right? It follows the natural system of fires, kills especially a lot of the brush species. The idea was you'd knock it back, and then that would allow you to plant without giving if you plant it, especially, you're giving your trees a start where they can outcompete any what we call the competition. It's reliable. It works. We had lots of experience in the 1970s, lots of research. I have to keep in mind, though, fires do promote aspen root suckering, so you get lots of aspen also. That's feasible, worked in the past. Where prescribed burning, where there's a hesitancy, is in the practical. It has its challenges. And I think a lot of it is the high risk. The liability concerns, if the fire gets away, is something I think a lot of the companies are worried about. So I think it's why you don't see much prescribed burning, that risk of the fire escaping and the liability associated with is really something everyone, or at least a lot of the companies, I think, are shying away from it. Site preparation. This is something was in HAP 1. We had one of the research scientists, ministry research scientists out, and he saw some of the site preparation. So Tembec generally uses this, what they call a disc trencher. So after it's harvested, they'll go in with this disc trencher just to basically creating plantable spots for the tree planters. Quite effective, tends to create these rows where the soil is upturned. One of our research scientists saw this and said, if you have any aspen, especially if you look at the stand edge, you'll see some down later in the background. Any aspen along the edge, you're breaking up the roots. You're going to have a bigger problem with aspen now that you went and broke up all the roots. So site preparation is a funny thing. Quebec folks tell us if you're going to site prep and you don't want aspen, you have to site prep really aggressively, and you get the bulldozers out and basically rip the root layer up. Trenching, like this disc trenching, that's what we've been told is what, if you want to hold back aspen, this is what you don't do. So I think it hasn't been tried, but there's a few little trials. This is out in Wawa. They have this little, what they call a spot scarification. So this machine, rather than create a ditch, it drops down and creates these little spots. So it drops down and creates a little spot. So you're not ripping up all the aspen roots. You got the only place you're disturbing are these little spots. You plant a tree in there, and then you're hopefully then you've reduced your aspen competition. The other one, this is another one I think we've all heard from Quebec, is the large seedlings. Plant large seedlings, give the head start of any of the brush. Large seedling, it doesn't give it a head start on aspen. Aspen can grow really, really quick, but it'll give you a head start. The idea was on the brush and some of the kind of the smaller vegetation. And Tembec or Ram, Tembec in the day actually started this. And so you can see the specification between the regular size seedlings, which this nursery worker she has in her right hand. It's our left, but her right hand, versus the large seedlings, which is in her left hand. Quite a bit difference. I know Tembec was doing this. The cost, they've told me, is it's about roughly 10% between the nursery cost. You increase your cost by 10%, and then you have to pay your tree planters up to 10 or 20% more per seedling, just because you can't carry them around. Can't carry as many seedlings in your bag, and then it's just tougher to plant because they're a little larger. It's tougher to handle. So you've got increased costs there. Tembec picked up this cost. They didn't. They thought it was worth it. I haven't seen the results, so I think this is something we have to follow up. Whether the large seedlings really helped or not. Quebec claims, I mean, they use, actually, from what I've seen, they use seedlings even larger than what you see here. And again, we haven't seen the results from Quebec. We've asked for it to see the results from Quebec, but we haven't seen the results yet. They seem, I don't know, they haven't put a report. So that's what we're waiting for, is a report from Quebec to see really how this large seedlings work. This is the motor manual brushing, or the brushing that I think when we talk about alternatives to herbicides, this is what we generally think of. Getting out there with a little brush cutter, have the workers out there, and you're basically cutting all the brush. Tembec, this is a trial that Tembec tried. It was interesting. If you look at this, what they're cutting, just wanted to circle it. This is an aspen stem, and what we learned, this VMAP 1990 study, what we've learned is cut aspen high, and that helps prevent the suckering. So that's one thing we've learned. So VMAP does come in handy. They've tried this, and again, I unfortunately haven't been back. This is, I think, again, another HAP trip. Is this was done, I don't know, geez, during HAP 1, it's got to be 7 years old now. So you should know whether it works. What the brushing doesn't do is all this that shrub layer underneath. It's a little harder time with that, with controlling the shrub layer. But definitely, I think we can control the aspen layer if it's done properly. It's expensive, and I think that's again the so it's reliable. We think especially if you cut it high, it's feasible. You can do it. We've got. I mean, there's nothing. You have people around to do it. The practical part is where there's hesitancy, I think, on the industry. It's expensive. Tembec costed it when they did this trial. They costed it, and they figured it's about 10 times compared to aerial application. So that's based on a treatment. One trial block. It probably is a little less than that if you did it on a large scale, but it is quite a bit more costly than aerial, and I think that's why you see the hesitancy of going to complete manual. Operationally, you've got a smaller window. It has to, when you're doing manual, it's not something you do all full season. Basically, beginning of June to mid-July is when you can do it effectively. After that, you cut the aspen, and it's going to come back. It really comes back a lot the following year. So you've got a smaller window. It's slower. So efficiency. I know the industry. This is why when you talk about brushing, the mechanical brushing, they always hesitate. And I know Quebec does this a lot. Again, we've been trying to get numbers from Quebec and just haven't been able to get it. So that's kind of the conventional way when we think herbicide alternatives. That's what we generally, I think those are the treatments we generally think of. There's some of the new stuff that's on the horizon, and one of it's mulching, and it's an idea that when you think about it, it makes sense because we all do it when we grow our gardens, right? So I've got a garden out here, and what do? I mean, a lot of ours is cedar chips, but you put down a mulch, and the reason is you're keeping the competition down. So this is common practice in gardening. So I've talked to some of the research scientists around MNRF, and we looked at it. And for one thing, the way they harvest now, it's not as if there's a lack of material in the bush. The markets on small wood just aren't there. Sawlog they want, veneer aspen's good. OSB is so market. Even pulp market nowadays is falling out. Industry can get a lot of their wood chips just from the sawmills. So what happens to the wood gets left behind. So it's not as if there's a lack of material in the bush. There's lots of it. And so I was sitting there with a research scientist one day, and we were just kind of mulling around the idea and said, well, you mulch your garden. What happens if we chipped all this stuff and used it just like the garden mulch, put it on? It just so happened the outfit in Wawa on the White River Forest, they actually tried it. This is this VH mulcher that spot scarification in the background, and they actually thought of a way. It wasn't so much for keeping herbicides down. It was they're trying to figure a way. You see those big slash cones in after there's harvest, the big slash piles, and public doesn't like it. It just they thought, well, why don't I just distribute it all over the my area where I can, and then I'll use this VH mulcher, and I'll create my plantable spots right within the all the wood chips, and then I can plant my trees, and then I spread out my my residual wood that I left behind, and plus I can get this back to conifers, and where I save money is I don't have to spray it, so there's no herbicide application. So they actually tried it in Wawa. It's small scale, not big scale. And that's again something I think we're gonna have to take a look at. I've seen it at the early stages, but I haven't seen it. I think I was there about 5 years ago in the early stages. Something again on a HAP tour. I think that'd be again something worth looking at. Research science. This is Dave Morris. He's actually on our HAP2 committee. he tried this mulching, but not to keep, again, it's an accidental thing. He has a biomass trial in the northwestern Ontario, and they were just same thing. You've got all this slash piles in the front. Is there a way they can kind of disperse the slash, just so it's not such an eyesore? You see it. I mean, we've all seen those big cones sitting there at the side of the landing, and so it was kind of a biomass trial. They were thinking, well, why don't we take that, disperse it to across the harvested area? The stuff eventually breaks down, it decomposes, eventually breaks down and gets back into the site. So they thought, okay, well, why don't we try this? They weren't thinking of herbicide control at all. But I asked him about it, and he sent me this photo, and you can see where it's jack pine, but where in the forefront is where they put all the wood chips, and then you just see behind it where you can see where the brush competition is coming up, and that's where they just didn't put it there. He wasn't thinking of herbicide alternatives, but I look at it and think, well, here we go. Look at this. So I think as he remeasures this trial, he is going to start looking at this brush layer coming up. So it's a possibility. It looks like it'll work. It looks like it's feasible, but the question is it practical? And this is the cost. It always comes down, the companies are looking at cost, is how much is this going to cost? But if we look at it, compared to herbicide application, aerial application, for sure, this is going to be more expensive. But then when you look at it, if you had to clean up these areas with all this wood left behind, and if it was a herbicide alternative and you had to do manual brushing, would spreading the slash out be cheaper than all of that, right? So it kind of changed the economics a bit. But we don't, when they did this, they didn't work out the cost. This was just a kind of a research trial, but it's a potential. I've talked to Dave about it, and it's like, yeah, well, it's something maybe we want to look at. And this I say it's new, this study and emulate natural systems. It's a way, this actually isn't new. This was in the early early 2000s, the late 1990s, this, what we called mixed wood management, was a real big thing. And everyone right across Canada, they were looking at this emulate natural disturbances and mixed wood management, and kind of looked at it and decided, well, maybe there's something here that we can use in the herbicide alternative as herbicide alternatives. The study and emulate natural systems, I mean, I kind of liked it because we are supposed to be emulating natural systems in forestry. So if we looked at it, right, starts off, we always talk about boreal forest being this fire origin, big fires, but we see it in the Northwest region, kind of west of Thunder Bay, for sure. Northeast, we're not quite as flammable. We don't quite get big fires as often. We can get it, like Timmins 9 was that big one around Gogama. So we can get it. But the big thing with fire, what if there's aspen beforehand and a fire goes through, you get lots of aspen coming back. And so then how do you get your conifers back? This is a mixed wood trial just up by Iroquois Falls. So you have your aspen overstory, and what happens? You get balsam fir and spruce come in on the understory. And as the aspen stand breaks up, and the aspen starts to die off, creating light conditions, what happens? Like the spruce and the balsam fir start to take over. So if we really look at these natural systems and figure out when and how does that conifer get in, can we then use that as a way to avoid herbicides? Because the aspen does, it just naturally dies off when it's younger than a conifer, just part of the natural dynamics. So can we use that? And eventually these aspen stands, they do become, you start to get this conifer dominated. This is an old aspen stand out by Hearst. And you get, like, it's not a lot of spruce, but the spruce you do get are high quality, like no limbs. That's a high quality, like commercially, when you look at it, it's high quality tree. So, even economically, you got to look at it that way. And from habitat, these are these super canopy, what we call super canopy trees. These are those trees these spruce trees that are kind of above all the canopies. So I think habitat, it's something we want to keep around anyway. So, and so if we know the natural dynamics and how it works, maybe we can work with the natural dynamics. And first of all, there's timing of harvest. Our big thing is we harvest these mixed kind of aspen, birch, conifer stands, and the aspen especially comes in after very aggressively. It'll take over the whole stand, and in regeneration, you won't have your conifers at the front end. It's actually on one of the HAP tours, HAP 2 tours that we took, and there was I think it was Rob Fleming, one of the CFS, the NRCan research scientists, asked, well, why don't you wait to more of this if you look at the conifer coming up, why don't you wait till it starts to dominate, right? And then log it, because then you wouldn't have as much aspen. And so you could then log clear cut when the conifer is dominating. You don't have as much aspen aggressively coming back. So that would allow you to plant conifers, and perhaps you wouldn't need to apply herbicides to the aspen. So you could just let everything go naturally. That's it's an idea. I don't think anyone's purposely done it. I mean, if you come across these older stands with conifer dominating, it happens just because that's the harvesting plan. But I don't think we ever look at it and purposely say, oh, we're not going to log these stands. We're going to wait 40 years until the conifers start to dominate before we harvest them. We've never kind of looked at it in that way. So that's one way it's possible, is work with the natural dynamics. The second way, and this is some of the trials they did. This is when in the kind of early 2000s, when Lake Abitibi model forest was going around. This is some of what we call the mixed wood trials that we tried, and one was emulating natural systems. So what happened here was, this was an aspen overstory, and you see the conifer, the spruce and balsam fir coming up on the understory. And what they did was they did a partial harvest. They removed roughly about 30 to 50% of the aspen canopy. So you get commercial value out of it through the aspen wood, and then you just allow the conifer to take over. The conifers in the understory are they're large enough that you don't worry about the competition from the shrub layer, because shrub layer can get up to maybe 2 meters, and these trees at the time of harvested were 4 or 5 meters, so they're fine there. And the aspen that does come back, because it's partially shaded, it prevents the aspen that does come back from surviving. So it's a kind of a neat little trick, and it's just experimental, but it was something they tried of kind of using the natural dynamics to keep the aspen from growing vigorously, at the same time have your conifers come up. They did another trial in the Lake Abitibi model forest. This was a different one. And so what they did here was cut these, it was more of like a strip cutting. So they cut 10-meter strips, and then they would leave at 10 meters, then they wouldn't harvest 10-meter strip. And the idea then is you plant conifers within the harvested strips. And because there's aspen on both sides, like mature aspen, tall aspen on both sides, you don't get the aspen suckering coming back, because again, aspen needs lots of light. So it prevents any competition from the aspen. And then it becomes a bit of a race between your planted spruce and your shrub layer. And from what the last time we saw it, the planted spruce seemed to be doing quite well, keeping up. Unfortunately, this trial, just by an accident, was sprayed herbicide application about 8 years ago. So we never got to see, we won't get to see the results. It was an accident, that a mapping problem that wasn't mapped properly. So we unfortunately lost it. But last time we looked, and the researcher looked at it, it looked like the spruce coming up in that little harvested row probably could have made it. And so in the future, that aspen would die out. You would get a little bit larger conifers within the leaf rows. Then you'd have the spruce coming up in the middle. So that was another way they kind of worked on. You could do it without herbicides. Again, practical. It's a partial harvest. So for sure, everyone would want to come in and take everything, because then you get the value of everything. To leave half of it behind, your road costs and everything are fixed. Now you're leaving half behind. So then it gets to that whole practical aspect. And I mean, that's operations. I'm not sure. I tend not to comment on the operations stuff. There's this idea of a nurse crop, and we've heard. I know it came up at the last one. Brunswick House First Nation always talks about using hemp as a nurse crop, right? So the idea is get a crop in that's fairly aggressive, takes over the site, but allows you to plant your spruce in behind. So it takes over the site, so it holds back some of the, definitely holds back your aspen competition, because aspen needs light. So hold that back, hold back some of your shrub competition, and then you plant your spruce in between, and it allows the spruce to take over. And I know it's come up about using hemp. My big thing
Is there a
is,
picture?
yeah,
Oh.
I've got one coming up.
Okay.
My big thing is, why introduce hemp? We have one. It's called aspen. Right? Aspen aggressively takes over a site after a clear cut, if it's there before. Aggressively takes over a site. Canopy closes, shuts off all the light. And the key and the unknown is, at what point do you plant the spruce? Because if you plant the spruce too early, the aspen will actually shut the light off and the spruce won't survive. But and again, we haven't looked at it. It works in Alberta. They've done a lot of work kind of in Alberta, but it's a little bit different. They're dealing with this Calamagrostis grass, which is shade intolerant. So once the aspen canopy goes over and knocks out the Calamagrostis, as the canopy breaks apart, you can plant your spruce, and there's no problem. The challenge we have here is our shrub species are shade tolerant. They will grow back underneath this aspen. So and we haven't quite figured it out. It's timing. So at what point this aspen comes in, and I've walked through it. So anecdotally, I'm pretty sure the canopy closes so much that there's nothing growing in the understory, underneath this aspen. Seems about 15 to 20 years. And then as that aspen starts to thin out, you get more light in it, and then the shrubs start coming in. But if we get our spruce in there, especially when you plant it, gives the spruce a head start. Can like spruce outcompete any of the other vegetation coming in? So then you could end up with your spruce stand, and you're actually using the aspen helping you to keep the spruce. It's a kind of a interesting way the Americans talk about it. We call it a nurse crop. Americans call them warrior plants, as they come in quick. They're aggressive. They take it over, but they allow you to grow what you want after. So it's something we don't know about. We don't know too much about. If you look at a natural system, somehow that spruce, balsam fir, we know gets in. Balsam fir is big seed. We know, and it's very shade tolerant. So we know balsam fir, how that gets in. But I've asked a lot of research scientists, how the heck does the spruce get in? Like the black spruce and the white spruce, just to get that mix. And no one's studied this enough to really know. All I've been told, you got to have a really good seed source. It's highly variable. And there's new research coming out with this at HAP 2 we talked about with Microtech about the mycorrhiza. There's research coming out with the Suzanne Simard out of UBC, and she talks about leaving big trees, what she calls mother trees or focal trees, and through that mycorrhiza link, that mother tree actually seems to send carbohydrates over to these smaller regeneration ones. So maybe that's how they survive under the canopy. This is a bit of an unknown, but I think it's something. I mean, as a researcher, I would think people would be quite excited about it, but maybe that's the way the natural dynamics work. And I think it's something definitely it'd be nice to look at. Now, I just want to quickly just we have all these treatments and we always hear, oh, use mechanical, but we got to do it. To me, it's site is the key. And we had, I know in our Kim Chapman talks about the whole thing, the whole concept of using the site. And this is where it comes important. In forestry, we use this grid. It's kind of soil nutrient availability across the top. Soil moisture comes across the side. And basically what we're saying, there's low amount of nutrients, moderate nutrients, or high amount of nutrients. And the moisture, the soil is either really dry, so there's always a drought. Fresh and moist is ideal conditions, is not a drought, but wet is when there's too much water. So it affects your plants that way. So just as a brief description, so nutrient availability, if we look up at this upper left corner there, it's low nutrients and it's a dry site. So it lacks nutrients and it lacks water. What does that mean? Think of beach sand, right? So if you had a site and it's beach sand, it's really coarse. There's not too much organic matter on it. You let water through it, water just flows right through. So anytime it rains, boom, it drains. So that's what we mean by this low and dry, low nutrient, but dry sites. So what do you get on that? That's your jack pine. And you see these jack pine, you have lichens, big indicator of a dry site. And look at the understory, hardly anything coming in the understory. It's tough environment for plants. Got to be pretty tough. So the shrub layer, you get some, but it's not, if you look here, it's not a lot. When you harvest these sites, these are the ones, yeah, probably don't need vegetation management. I can go in there and harvest it. If I plant it right away, probably will get jack pine quite well just by leaving it. On the opposite end, you can have these wet sites way down here. So they got a high water table, a lot of water. And again, it lacks a lot of nutrients. So what do you get here? Or what kind of site are these? These are, if you think of peat moss, if you ever use peat moss in your garden, and this is sphagnum moss is what it is. And what the thing on sphagnum or peat moss, why you use it, it holds water. And that's the idea here, is that these sites are these what we call lowland sites. They're wet. Black spruce, these are these black spruce bogs. That's big thick sphagnum mat, and that's what we get on it. If you walk in them, you're always getting your boots wet. But again, if you look at the understory, there's not much coming. It's a tough environment for plants. Anytime there's a tough environment, it's tough so the trees are growing slow, but it's tough for like any of the shrub species. It's tough for all the plants. And so in these environments, this is where we eat this. If you ever heard of the careful logging around advanced growth clag, they use a lot of this in the clay belt. As you go in and you basically leave it, there's a lot of little black spruce. You can't really see it here, but you see this the way black spruce regenerates from the branches. You see a lot of these little black spruce coming up. So the idea is these regeneration will take over. Seeding on sphagnum is real easy. It just takes, it's a moist environment. The black spruce seeds take to it. So you can regenerate these sites quite well. And again, because it's tough environment for a lot of plants, most cases, you don't need vegetation management. You can get away without it. But where there's the challenge, and this is where the herbicide alternatives I think we're really starting to look at, is this what we call the yummy sites. There's lots of nutrients. The moistures, it doesn't dry out, adequate moisture all year, or all during the growing season. These are the sites, and of course, when you think of it, what you do is you think of your garden, and the soil, right? It's that really black, rich soil, lots of organic matter. And that's what you grow when you think of your garden. That's kind of what you want for your vegetables and your plants that you're growing in a garden at home. But as in all gardens, when you've got soils like that, just so perfect amount of water and nutrients, what happens? Everything likes it, and so you end up, you have to weed your garden, or your because all these other plants start coming in and competing with your vegetables, that you end up weeding it. And so it's the same problem in forestry, or same challenge. These sites, everything likes it because it's that's like we say, we call them the yummy sites. Everybody likes it. So you get these thick, you harvest it and open it up after a clear cut, very thick shrub layers. And this is an aspen stand, and that you can see it even before you go into it. Is these maples, hazels, pin cherries? They're easily 2 meters tall. You're walking under it. So very, very what we call highly competitive sites. These ones, leave it like if you don't want to if you don't want to be fighting this with herbicides, these are the ones just leave it to aspen. Cut it, the aspen comes back. Don't worry about it. That's what you're going to have. That's an aspen site. That's what it's made for. If you want the conifers, I think you have to looking at the timing of harvest. Let the natural spruce and balsam fir, if it comes up on the understory, wait till it starts to dominate the sites. Partial harvesting. This is, that strip cut we looked at. I think these are the ones that what you look at doing this partial harvesting, and possibly this nurse crop, if we ever kind of figure out how that works. Use the aspen, the regenerated aspen. Use it to cut the light out, and then even all these shrubs can't survive. And then we have got to figure out how to get our spruce under there. So these are the ones you don't want to do mechanical on, because you lose every time. And I've seen this too often where foresters actually try mechanical on these sites, and then they turn around and say, see, it doesn't work. Well, of course it's not going to work on this site, right? It's very, very, all the plants really like it. So these are the ones you want to do your mechanical on. So then there's this whole middle portion in the middle. Hang on, a back up. It's kind of moderate nutrients. Still got the moisture is really nice, but just you don't have a whole heck of a lot of nutrients. And when you think about that, you had your sand, which is your dry, low nutrient sites, and your really rich garden soil. These moderate sites, you kind of put them together, and you get this moderate kind of site. It can still get a lot of vegetation on it, but it's just not as much as those really, really those real nutrient, what we call nutrient rich sites. And these ones, I think these sites are the ones where there's really opportunity. Unfortunately, there's a lot of these sites, but this is the ones that you really want the opportunity to do alternative to herbicides. I think all options are open. And this is where it's going to work. The reason I put this in, because I've seen too many times, that inappropriate doing mechanical on those rich sites, and then that kind of becomes the proof that it doesn't work. And herbicide alternatives is about knowing their sites and knowing which ones have your potential and what to do. And that's where boots on the ground. I borrowed this slide from Isabel. Boots on the ground comes in, and it's just, if without boots on the ground, you can do, I've said this before, without boots on the ground, you can do as much mechanical as you want, and I almost guarantee it's going to fail. You have to know the sites. You have to know the vegetation response. You have to know even the pre-harvest condition. What was it like before you harvested it? What's it like after? What comes in? And that's to me, the only way to learn the best way to learn is get the boots on the ground, so that whoever's working on it, your foresters or your forest technicians or your biologists, whoever's working in the field, if they're in the field all the time, I think then they start to see where the potential is, that you can apply alternative herbicides, where you can just leave your aspen and not just walk away, let it go to aspen. Where don't I need herbicides, so that there's no sense spraying some of these areas. And I think when I look at this came from, I believe, Isabel's work with RIAM on their vegetation competition indices. And that's, from what I understand, they reduced, just doing vegetation competition indices reduced, I think it was like 20% herbicide use. Classic win-win, because now it's less expensive. But and that's the boots on the ground, seeing what's going on out there is, to me, is the key. Everything fails. the alternative herbicides will fail without boots on the ground. So I think we have to kind of think of the whole system. And finally, just want to end, last slide. So that's 1990. Ontario has been after this, trying to gradually reduce dependence on herbicides. And I came here in 2000, and I've worked with foresters in my position just as a science specialist. I worked with them. They're not what we used to call nozzle heads. They just don't have all the answers. They've always told me, if you want to reduce herbicides, you got to give us something. Like, well, how can we do this? And this non-chemical, or even though Tembec's been talking about it for over 10 years now, I know Quebec's been doing it since 2000, but that's relatively new in forestry timeline. So I think foresters, I've talked to a lot of them, and basically we don't have the answers. We don't have all the answers. And this is where they're seeking help to eliminate this dependence on herbicides. And when Tembec started this, I was at the beginning when Tembec started HAP, the version 1 portion, and that was a lot of it was, we don't have all the answers. We need your help here. And I think then, if we approach it kind of more with an open mind, we can on the forester side of seeing herbicides, and I think Chris McDonald mentioned this at the last meeting, is seeing herbicides as a last alternative, not the first alternative. And that alone will start to get us thinking, and how we can start doing things a little different. And that's it, Isabel.